Hey there, I'm a 27-year-old lady who feels abandoned in a time of need. My father passed away 2 years ago, leaving just my mom and my younger sister, Bernice. My husband's currently battling for his life, and my mother has refused to help me. She's rather focused her love and attention on my younger sister, but it was never like this. I used to be very close to my mother till I graduated from college and decided to get married to the man I had chosen for myself. I was in my final year in college when I met my husband, Kyle. He was already working as a sales rep for about a year when our paths crossed. He barely had anything to his name, but he was a visionary. He knew exactly what he wanted in life, and this was something that I needed in my would-be husband. The money was secondary. We kept our relationship a secret even after I was done with my education. I began to get a lot of pressure from my mother just 3 months after my graduation. She always had, quote, someone who she loved for me to meet, and all these guys had one thing in common: money. Well, I didn't blame my mother for trying to hook me up because nobody knew that I was already in a relationship. I spoke with Kyle and we decided it's time that we come out with our relationship. I felt that it would make my mother quit trying to set me up, and it initially worked. It was not long, however, that she began to ask what plans Kyle had for me. She said that I dated him for way too long, and if he was serious about me, he should have asked me to marry him by now. My mother even claimed that it was possible he had several ladies on the side, and that was why he seemed reluctant to get married to me. I relayed what was going on to Kyle, and he officially just asked if I would get married to him. He clearly admitted that he did not have much to himself besides his name, but assured me that he was putting structures in place to ensure that we lived a comfortable life. I put my whole life in the hands of Kyle by saying yes. There was no engagement party of any kind. I got to the house and announced to my family that I was engaged to my lover. My parents and sister were all happy for me. I noted that Kyle would be coming over to meet with them, and they were eager to see him. My mother went all out to prepare for my fiancé's visit. I tried to plead with her to be moderate with her preparations because you would think that she was expecting the president. But my mom refused. She noted that her would-be in-law deserved presidential treatment. So Kyle shows up at our house on the day, and my mother was outright disappointed from the moment his taxi pulled up to the house. She used her eyes to make an assessment of him and just stared in disbelief at my choice of suitor. She never said a word during the time of discussion, and you could see the annoyance written on her face when Kyle heartily ate the lunch which she had taken time to prepare for the president. Part of what was discussed on that day was our wedding. We told them that we were not much in preparation because it was going to be a small family get-together ceremony with just a few invited friends. My father was very welcoming. He asked me and Kyle to get in touch with him if we needed their assistance in the wedding prep. Kyle thanked them and left, and that was when my mother pulls me to the side. She asked if I wanted to live the rest of my life in suffering, because that was the only thing Kyle would give to me. My father overheard my mother, and he immediately rebuked her by telling her that Kyle was the man I had chosen, and my decision was to be respected. My mother has a sharp tongue, and she responded by saying that she would not be against the union if I was actually getting married to someone who was man enough. My mother claimed that he was not man enough because he was broke. I know my father reacted to my mother's comment, but I did not wait around to hear what he said. I just stormed off to my room. So, as the day of my wedding approached, my mother tried her best to dissuade me. She pleaded with me to not embarrass myself and the family by getting married to somebody who was, quote, below our standard. I ignored her. The moment it dawned on her that I was going to get married to Kyle regardless of her approval, she began to harbor resentment towards me, and I did not care. My husband and I had our small wedding ceremony, and though my mother was present, she was not part of the wedding picture. My mother never bothered to check up on me after the wedding. She just channeled all of her energy towards my younger sister to make sure that she did not end up, quote, embarrassing her the way I did. It was so bad that even when my father passed away from a heart attack 1 year later, they both refused to call and inform me. I came to know about it a week later from friends of the family who called to sympathize with me. I went to the family house, but I did not quarrel with either of them. It was not necessary as we were all grieving. I asked my mother what the plan was for my father's funeral, and she bluntly told me to not bother, as it was likely that I could not contribute in any sort of way. I didn't take what she said to heart, as I felt that she was probably hurting and needed somewhere to channel her anger. My mother, however, asked that although I can come for my father's burial, she did not want to see my husband around because he would not fit in. I wanted to challenge what my mother had just said, but I decided to just ignore her. There was no way my husband would not pay his late respects to my dad. I mean, he's my husband after all, and I did not tell Kyle what my mother had said, otherwise he would have stayed back, and from the way things turned out, it would have been the best idea. So I show up with him on the day of my father's funeral, and my mother was not bluffing at all. My mother created a scene the moment that she saw my husband and I walk in. From the way that she reacted, you would think that my husband was responsible for the death of my father. Kyle, who was not expecting it, was surprised and embarrassed. We both did not spend up to 5 minutes at the funeral. My father was buried and he had left behind everything in my mother's care. Well, my mother used to use it to keep up her image while I kept my distance until last week when my husband had an accident. I was at work when I received a call that my husband had been rushed to the ER. He was involved in a ghastly accident that had claimed the lives of 2 other people, and he needed several surgeries performed on him. Well, I was a bit broken when I saw my husband's condition. It felt like I was dying and I needed every comfort I could get, so without thinking twice, I immediately reached out to my younger sister, right there at the hospital, but she did not take my call. I decided to call my mother and was glad when she picked up the call, even though she was silent and expected me to speak. I just started crying over the phone for the next few seconds since my mother was mute. I then told her that I was at the hospital where my husband was battling for his life. You would have thought that the mother would have cast our differences aside and immediately rushed down to the hospital, but all she said was, "Oh, sorry," before going ahead to cut the call. So, my emotional pain doubled the moment my mother cut the call on me, and I just broke down crying all over again, while those around me tried to console me. Someone whose presence would have been a great assistance and comfort is my friend Paula, but she's currently in another state running her company's errands, and I don't know when she would be returning. Well, the first set of surgery was conducted, a surgery that I had to empty all my savings to pay for, and my husband was stabilized to the point where he was conscious and could talk. I was with my husband when the doctor noted that he still needed further surgeries to be performed on him. Although my husband understood the situation and could even talk, he was really weak. He just requested for a piece of paper and pen when he wrote down the password to his Binance account. I knew he was into the whole crypto stuff, but I was not, so it didn't make a lick of sense. I left the hospital and began to think about how to raise the money for his surgery. Besides his surgery, our rent would be due in a month, and you know what it means. I decided to go to the family house yesterday to see if my mother could lend me some money. I was not happy about the fact that all the while my husband had been admitted to the hospital, neither her nor my sister had even cared to visit or call. My mother was seated in the drawing room with my sister when I walked in. She responded to my greeting while her attention was focused solely on the TV. My sister, on the other hand, was too busy with her phone. So, I explained to my mother the situation of things, and she told me that the thought of the situation was pitiable. She could not help me at the point in time because she didn't have the money. It was obviously a lie, and I knew it, so I persisted in pleading with her. I even asked her to lend me the money, which I could pay back in 4 months' time. But my mother, she flared up. She said that my husband had never been the beneficial person to the family, and she would not use the money meant to invest into a business to waste on him. I began to cry, but my mother was not moved by my tears. She rather asked me to quit trying to emotionally blackmail her because it was not going to work. She then suggested that I obtain a loan from these loan sharks if I really loved my husband. I stood up and left in frustration, and I've been thinking ever since. Since my mom would not help me, the loan sharks are the only option available, but I know how brutal they can be when you don't repay on time. So, what do you think I should do? I mean, what would you guys do if you were in my shoes? Please, let me know. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So we're going to hop into the first update because this is a nightmare situation. But first, if you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to subscribe, guys. Update number 1. It's been 4 months since I made an update, and I'm making this one with a broken heart. I've recently become a widow at 27 years of age. Yep. My husband Kyle passed away last week, but the painful part is that my mother is demanding that I pause the burial ceremony of my husband just to favor my sister. See, I'd borrowed the money for the second surgery, but he didn't make it. It was the darkest day of my life, and I actually felt like a part of me had died that day. The hospital was the one who called my mother to inform her, and she showed up with my sister to take me back to the house. They both seemed to care about me till we got to the house, and they left me all by my lonesome. I began to receive sympathizers right then and there to the house, and, whenever they were around, my mother and sister would act all caring, but would abandon me once the sympathizers had left. One would need to be in my shoes to even understand properly the plan of the pain. I'd lost my husband, I was in debt, and the only family I had did not want to share my pain. My sister got engaged recently, and she brought her fiancé for the first time to the house 2 days after the death of my husband. The guy looked like his pocket was loaded, and I could see how impressed my mother was with him. Before going ahead to state his intention, he sympathized with me for the loss of my husband. My mother, as usual, spoke on my behalf. She said that I was going through a tough time, but she and my sister were both making sure I stood strong. I ignored what my mother had said and thanked our would-be in-law for showing concern. Something just seemed off, though. He informed my mother and I that he and Bernice wanted to get married as soon as possible, and though he would love to give her the fairy tale wedding which she deserved and desired, he could not do so because he had a numerous multi-million-dollar project which he was handling at the moment. My mother spoke up before he had even barely finished his statement, and you could see that she wanted the marriage to take place because she offered single-handedly to cover the entire cost of the fairy tale wedding. I didn't even utter a word as I was pained from the inside. I guess I should have gotten used to my mother's partial by now, but our would-be in-law left our home, and my sister asked our mom how she intended to raise money for the wedding because it was not going to be cheap. Our mother then noted that she was going to get a loan just to fund the wedding. Well, that was stupid. Why would she obtain a huge loan to fund a wedding which would be her would-be son-in-law's responsibility? I made the mistake of dropping my opinion by saying how I thought it was very unwise of a financial decision that could be detrimental to our mother when she was unable to repay the loan. Bernice shot me a mind-your-business look before my mother slammed me for trying to get involved in my sister's affair. She said that I was in no place to be giving advice, especially when I was suffering for refusing to take one. She went ahead to say that it was going to be financially unwise to sit back and do nothing while watching this big fish, as she called him, slip from Bernice's hands. She then told Bernice that they would gain a lot more by the time she got married to the guy, and repayment for the loan was not going to be an issue. As I heard those words shamelessly leave her mouth, I knew that she was basically doing all of this for what she stood to gain. The date for my husband's burial was fixed, and I informed my mother and sister about it 2 days ago. They didn't seem interested at all, and I did not let it bother me. The problem now is that my mother walked into my room last night and demanded that I shift the burial date of my husband because they have just discovered that it coincides with the wedding date of my sister. Well, I was mad, obviously. How could they be telling me that, quote, they had just discovered? Was my husband's funeral not fixed first? I asked my mother why they would fix my sister's wedding date, the very day which was supposed to be my husband's funeral. But my mother, she yelled at me and walked out of the room without saying another word. I thought about it all through the night, and I'm certain that she made the demand just to serve a selfish purpose. Well, all hell would soon break loose because I'm not going to give in to the request. You know what? Let's just see what happens. Update number 2. Hey guys, it's been a few days since I last posted, and that's because I've been too distracted and frustrated. My younger sister Bernice has just gotten married while my husband is still at the morgue. He's been there for almost 2 weeks now, although he would soon be buried within the week. I had noted during my last post that I was not going to let my mother and sister have their way, and I knew it was not going to be easy. My mother approached me 3 days later to ask if I had started reaching out to my sympathizers to let them know that the funeral had been shifted. I told my mother I had not, because the funeral was still going to be held. I could see the anger all over her face, but I didn't care. I told her that I was not going to bend to her will or my younger sister, and she began to insult me and my late husband. She said Bernice's wedding was more important and profitable to the family, and she would not let him be able to shift or me to share the attention on the day when everything was supposed to be fixed on my sister. She went ahead to say that the living was more important than the dead, who was never useful while he was alive anywho, and then she stormed out of the room. See, I impatiently waited for Bernice to come back to the house so I could confront her. Her fiancé drove her back, and I saw it was the ideal time to create a bit of drama. My mother had come out to say hi to her would-be in-law when I stormed out and began to ask Bernice why she had chosen to disrespect me and my dishonor of my late husband. Bernice knew exactly what I was talking about, but she kept quiet. Her fiancé, who seemed lost, asked what the issue was about. But my mother, who was surprised at the dirt that I was trying to raise, immediately said, "Oh, it's nothing serious," as she shot me a warning glance, but I was too angry to give a hoot. I asked Bernice why she would fix her wedding on the day my husband was supposed to be buried into the earth. Her fiancé responded by saying that he was not aware that I was to bury my husband on the same day, and promised that they would postpone their wedding. My mother assured him that the misunderstanding would be resolved. He kissed Bernice goodbye and left, and my mother and Bernice turned on me. My own mother threatened to make life unbearable for me if I did not call everybody within the next 3 days and announce that I shifted the date of the funeral. I spoke with Bernice's fiancé the next day to tell him that there's no need to push his wedding, because I had already extended my husband's funeral. The young man thanked me for doing so, and it raised doubt in me about the kind of human being he is. If he was a thoughtful person, he would not be in support of his wife getting married within the same period of time when her sister was mourning her husband. Bernice had her wedding yesterday, and it was a lavish ceremony. Our mother really went all out to make sure it was, quote, above standard. Bernice has moved into her husband's home, and our mother, who does not want to have me around, asked me this morning when I would be going back to my apartment. This woman I call mother is wicked. How can she be asking such when I'm yet to be burying my husband? I told my mother that I had no intention of leaving the family house because my rent was almost due, and I already had lots of debts to settle. Besides, even if I had the money, I would not return back to the same house I shared with Kyle while he was still on this planet alive. It would just make me feel the loss all the more. My mother said that she understood the part about me not having money to pay for rent, so she would lend me money to rent an apartment once my husband was buried. This was just her trying to make sure I was out of her life. I reminded her that I was already indebted to loan sharks and I did not wish to go deeper into debt. My mother said that I should be ready to live on the streets because she would not harbor me anymore once my husband was buried. I seriously don't know what to do. It's just one drama after the other with my family, and honestly, I can't take any more of this. Update number 3. The tides have turned in my favor, and you would not believe it. So, this is exactly 2 months since my last post, and I'm still living at my father's house with my mother and my sister Bernice. I know you're probably having questions as to how and what my sister, who is married, is doing back at the family house, and I'm very happy to let you know that she is abandoning her marriage. You see, after her wedding, my mother asked me to quietly bury my husband because she was embarrassed to be associated with him. I buried my husband, and some sympathizers gave me some form of financial assistance so I could make something out of my life. The initial plan was to relocate to another state, but my friend Paul, who had been away on official duty, spoke with me over the phone. She advised that I simply rented an apartment and lived my life free of my family's headache. She promised to come visit me soon. I thought about it and decided to go with her decision. I had a job and a few friends, so there was no need to throw all of them away because I just wanted to stay away from my family. I rented an apartment, but something needs to be put in place. This was a different apartment from the one that I lived in with my husband. My mother constantly mounted pressure on me to make sure I left the house ASAP. Well, I was preparing one day to just go visit the apartment and see how the work was progressing, when somebody was banging at the door. So, I go to the door, and upon opening it, I discovered it was my sister, Bernice, and she was not alone. Well, she was with her luggage. I looked on in surprise, but she was just brushing past me and went to our mother, who was seated on the couch. We all knew that there was a problem the moment she began to cry. I stood by the side of our mother and inquired what the issue was, and with tears pouring out from my sister's eyes, she noted that she was done with her marriage. Our mother, who was as surprised or even more surprised than myself, asked what the issue was, and Bernice said that the man whom she had married was a liar, a scam. She told our mother that he was not at all who he claimed to be. According to her, her husband was no contractor. Oh no. He was a lazy guy whose only job was to prey on innocent rich women. Bernice said that he had seen her as his escape from poverty because he felt that she had lots of money to her name. Our mother screamed. She began to talk about how the loaned folks whom she had taken money from, which she used to sponsor Bernie's weddings, were on her neck, and she was making plans on reaching out to Bernice so she could talk to her husband. The worst part is that she had used the house as collateral for the loan. Our mother has been lost in her thoughts, and these past few days, well, something extremely great happens to me. My friend Paula came to visit me today. There was a lot of catching up to do since we had not had time to talk ever since my husband passed away. I told her about the Binance directive that my husband was trying to give, and Paula, who is in the crypto space, asked me to get the piece of paper what he writ down on. She screamed, and my mother's attention was immediately captured. See, she listened, as Paula told me that the reason why my husband had directed me to his Binance wallet was because he had crypto assets worth around $4.2 million. My mother immediately wadded into the conversation, and she asked if I knew what the discovery meant. I just kept quiet and looked on, and she said that it meant that we would be able to save the house by repaying the loan that she had collected to fund my sister's wedding. Well, her entitlement is really unbelievable. I did not give her the slightest hint that I was irritated by her selfishness. I just agreed with whatever she was saying. Paula just left a few minutes ago, and I'll be back, guys, in my next update, because I just need to process everything that's happening. Update number 4. I'd given my husband what I call a proper honor. The humiliation of my family. Guys, this update's coming a month after the last. Things change for me every day. My mother discovered that I was now a millionaire. I wanted to go the next day to see the apartment which I'd rented, but when I told my mother where I was going, she said it was not necessary. I was surprised to hear her say that there was no need for me to rent a home because my father's house was equally mine. I smiled because I knew it was my mother's selfishness speaking. She was now becoming nice to me because she wanted me to clear her bill. This is the same woman that's been pressuring me to move out of the house. The very woman who had been disrespectful of my late husband now wants me to use the money that he left behind to pay off her debt. I would be dishonoring my husband if I did just that. So I played along with my mother and acted like I was going to put an end to my moving out plans, but it was all a lie. My mother did not stop there. She began treating me like a queen. I no longer did anything in the house, and she would often quarrel with my younger sister Bernice for putting her in debt by letting a sponsor of her wedding be a fraud. I enjoyed watching them exchange words, and as the days progressed, my mother would ask me about the money to clear her loan, and I would always make up excuses to push the issue further while secretly going ahead with my plan. My mom, she was at ease as I gave her false hope that her debt would be repaired, but she received the shock of her life yesterday when the loan folks showed up. The apartment which I had rented had been furnished and put in place. All that remained was for me to just take my luggage and move in. This is exactly what I did yesterday. My mother rushed into my room yesterday to tell me the creditors had surfaced. She needed me to talk to them since I was the one who was to repay her loan on her. I went to the living room to talk to the loan folks with my mother following behind while my sister was already there. They had come to throw us out of the house. I began to talk to them like I was willing and ready to pay the money my mother borrowed, and I asked how much she owed, and the figure that they called was almost $1 million, and that they noted that, she had the house as collateral. I asked them to hold on. I went into my room while my mother and sister waited with him. I came out carrying my luggage, and my mother looked really surprised. I told the loan folks to go ahead, throw everybody out of the house because I wasn't going to pay a dime of what my mother owed them. The loan sharks immediately swooped into action while my mother began to scream in confusion. She began to plead with me to not let them take the house, and that this is when I gave her a piece of my mind. I reminded my mother of how she had refused to help me save my husband, and had even called him useless, but was now pleading as I used the money of a, quote, useless man who was never useful to her in this life or death, to pay off her loan. I went ahead to remind her of how she and my sister had attacked me when I warned against her taking the loan to sponsor Bernice's wedding. I then told both of them that I was moving into my new apartment today, and I never wanted anything to do with them again. I made my way to the door, opened it up, and was about to leave when I felt someone's hand wrap around my ankle. It was my sister Bernice, and she pleaded with me on her knees while noting that we were family, and we were supposed to stick together no matter what. I could see our mother nod in agreement, and I smiled before telling them that I was no longer a part of this family. I immediately broke free from my sister's grip, and they turned back to plead with their creditor for more time. I knew it was a waste of time because those loan guys are, known to never show mercy, and I didn't care, and I still don't care to this day. I just believe cutting my leech off of family life was one of the best decisions I could have made. I'm finally free from all the drama, living in my new apartment, though life is very hard without Kyle around. I'm trying to aim at my healing and make things work. I still have a few good friends like Paula on my side, and I'm grateful to them, and so am I to you guys for all the support that you've showed me. Thank you, and here is goodbye.